Welcome to the video on molecular shapes. So the model that we use to determine the shape of a molecule is called the VSEPR model. That stands for valence shell electron pair repulsion. And what it's going to allow us to do is translate between our Lewis model and an actual 3D shape for our molecule. So a formal definition of the VSEPR model or theory is that electron pairs in the valence shell of an atom repel, just like two negatives. They repel each other and will position themselves as far apart as possible, thereby minimizing repulsions. There are three parts we want to get there. That our electron pairs are repelling, they're moving each other as far apart, and the reason they're moving as far apart as possible is because that minimizes repulsion. So how do we keep track of these electron pairs? We're going to use the term electron domains. An electron domain is basically the space occupied by a particular electron pair or pairs. We have two kinds of electron domains. The first is a bonding domain. This is basically the electrons that are in a bond. So we're going to call that electrons that are shared between two atoms. Now, if we have double or triple bonds, we still count that as one domain because those bonds are going to be occupying the same space. So you'll have more electrons in the same basic space. The other kind of domain we have is called a non-bonding domain. These are the valence electrons on a single atom. And you'll remember I noted that they're called lone pairs when we talked about Lewis dot structures. So those are the lone pairs and we count them as non-bonding domains. For this video, I'm going to focus on bonding domains, but what we'll learn later on is that lone pairs actually change the way the shape of the molecule is. Lastly, I want you to note that we're measuring the electron domains around the central atom. So in a molecule, there are many atoms. We're going to pick a central atom and determine the shape around that atom. There may be more than one central atom, and therefore a molecule may have more than one shape. Let's take a look at some examples. First, I have hydrogen cyanide. This has 3 atoms, and when I write out the Lewis dot structure, I see 4 total bonds. Now, instead of counting these 3 as separate electron domains, I actually count them as one whole electron domain. So this is going to have 2 electron domains around the carbon. So I'm going to use that number 2 to determine its shape in information I'm about to give you. Now note that there is an electron domain on the nitrogen that we didn't count. That's because it is not around the central atom. Okay, next up is boron trichloride. Boron is our central atom. We have 3 electron bonding domains around boron. Again, I'm going to emphasize that the outside or outer atoms don't count their electron domains. I'm now noticing that there should be 2 pairs of electrons on this chlorine that I forgot to write down. But the point overall is that there are 3 electron domains for boron trichloride. Water is going to be slightly different because with water, we have 2 bonding domains and 2 non-bonding domains. So there are 4 total domains, but those 2 non-bonding domains are going to result in a slightly different shape than if I had 4 bonding domains around the molecule. So we're going to learn that non-bonding domains might result in a different name or a different bond angle because they have a different amount of repulsion than these electrons that are being shared. Now we're going to start with 5 basic shapes. I'm going to ask you to make a chart, and in that chart you're going to have a couple of columns. The first is going to be the number of electron domains. The second will be the shape. You might include a drawing as well as the name. And then the third will be the bond angle. And you will have 5 different shapes that you're going to include in this chart. So if I have 2 electron domains, I'm going to end up with a linear shape, like the hydrogen cyanide I showed before. The bond angle with the linear shape is 180 degrees. If you were to make one angle larger, the other would become smaller. So 180 is as far apart as those electron domains can become. Our next shape is if I had 3 electron domains. We call this planar triangular or planar triangle. So this is a flat triangle, one central atom with 3 atoms or electron domains on the outside. The bond angle here starts at 120 degrees. Our next shape starts at 4 electron domains. This is a common shape around carbon. We call this tetrahedral. Notice the 4 in that name. These bond angles are 109.5. Our next shape has 5 electron domains and might be new to some of you, and this is called trigonal bipyramidal. So what you'll see is 2 kind of antennas poking out of the outside and a planar triangular shape along the center. That's going to result in 2 bond angles. The first bond angle is 120 degrees between the planar triangular and 90 degrees between the 2 kind of antenna sides and the center. Our last shape has 6 electron domains, and this is called an octahedral shape. All of these angles are going to be at 90 degrees. You'll have 4 kind of going around the center or the equator of the shape, and then 2 sticking out just like we had antenna in the trigonal bipyramid. Lastly, I want you to note that the bond angles here may change, actually they will change, as we change the electron domains from bonded domains to non-bonding domains, and I'm going to talk about that in our next video. Our last point of business is to discuss nonpolar and polar molecules. So some molecules will have a symmetrical shape. So all of the molecules that we've seen, or the shapes that I've shown you today, have a central atom. If all of the outer atoms are the same, then the shapes I've shown you today are considered symmetric shapes, and therefore they will have a nonpolar behavior. Now, if you have an asymmetric shape in terms of polarity of bonds, then you're going to get a polar bonds. The way we get that with the shapes that I've shown you today is by having different outer atoms, such as the hydrogen cyanide. So we can see that the hydrogen is going to have a lower electronegativity than the nitrogen. And so when you actually draw out this atom, or this molecule rather, the nitrogen ends up with a partial negative and the hydrogen ends up with a partial positive. So because they have different outer atoms around our central atom, you end up with an asymmetrical shape. At this point, you should be able to use the Lewis structure of a molecule to determine the shape as well as number of electron domains. For each of the shapes, you should know the standard bond angle. Bye! Happy studying!